Good afternoon and welcome to the Cityforum Policing webinar. Please ask any questions via the chat function throughout the event. I would now like to hand you over to Cityforum's chairman, Marc, who will begin the session.
I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this, the fourth part of an extremely interesting series, which I had the pleasure of originating in a conversation with Martin Hewitt some months ago. And we thought that the areas we were thinking of looking at would be particularly interesting in this period. And as the news evolves, it is sort of self-evident that we were right. We have plenty to explore. Community engagement is the theme for today, and Cityforum is delighted to be able to present this sort of project with the help of BT Cisco. Sean Penny will be speaking for BT Cisco in a moment. Motorola and Accenture, who've sort of helped us with the budgets for what is sort of quite a sort of complex sort of preparation sort of effort. And we want to produce a report at the end, which will be of some use. Very grateful to sponsors. We're chaired this afternoon by Christine Elliott, who has looked after our events before. She's a director of IOPC. She was interim chair of the College of Policing, knows a huge amount about the subject, and she will explain how the afternoon is to be organised, which part of it is on the record and which part of it is not. Then the panel, well, we were very, very fortunate with this panel. Olivia Pinkney, Chief Constable of Hampshire, is coming back again, and we're extremely grateful to you, Olivia, for finding time to sort of join us in a period when I gather your diary is ghastly. We're also joined again for the second time by Professor Leslie Thomas QC, who I think will produce a senior barrister's sort of contribution to this afternoon, which will be really important. Then we feature two people we haven't spoken for us before. Donna Jones, the PCC for Hampshire, who joins us for the sort of first time. We're particularly so pleased to welcome you, Donna, and we'll be very interested in what you have to say. Then John Kabuya from sort of Middlesbrough, who has a big interest in sort of policing, sort of crime, sort of law and order, but also in the many wider sort of questions of sort of important concern in the BAME communities. And we're particularly glad, John, that you're able to sort of join us also. So we have an excellent panel. We shall produce a report under the Chatham House sort of rule at the end of the occasion. Christine will take over, but I would first of all like to introduce Sean Perry from BT, without whom, as I say, this project wouldn't be developable at all. And then in the middle of the conversation, between the presentations and the off-the-record discussion, David Robinson of Motorola, who is I'm sort of happy to see a regular supporter of ours. He will be doing the bridging work between the two halves of the day. Sean, over to you, please, for your welcome plus comments, and then straight across to Christine, and I shall turn myself into a scribe. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to a really sort of penetrating group of questions. We've got a panel which is of very high quality, and the answers to good questions should be pretty remarkable. Thank you. John.
Thanks, Marc. Thank you. So first of all, really delighted to have been part of the series, Marc. Thank you. It's really refreshing to see such a, on all these series, such a wide group, diverse group of people with different backgrounds, different views, different inputs, all come together and talk about such important topics. So that's been fantastic. I guess second of all, well done to Cityforum and everyone that's engaged in Cityforum, especially through the virtual series. I think it's been a huge success, and that's down to everybody that's been part of it. So that's been fantastic to see. Personally, I am also looking forward, though, to getting back to a bit of normality and hopefully seeing some of you in person in the near future. Let's hope that continues to move in that direction. The British Police are at an inflection point, alongside technology, which is changing so fast, alongside new advancements in modern communications. It offers a lot of opportunity. And if I look and reflect back on the last few years in the pandemic, everybody went into this really unprecedented situation. Everybody had to adapt. Everybody was affected, from businesses to policing to the public, to my 9-year-old nan, to a 5-year-old boy at school. Everybody was affected, and everybody had to learn and to adapt. But the one thing that I think really did come out of the pandemic is that technology was at the centre of the communities. It pulled people together. It prevented isolation in many cases, and it really enabled a sense of community throughout the pandemic. I think then, reflecting on what we've seen, so since the pandemic, we have seen our customers, businesses, people just engage differently. And I think there's been a fundamental cultural shift in how people choose to and want to engage in as we enter into a new world. And it's forced people into new ways of doing things, regardless of who you are. So I think also looking at it, it's broken age barriers, so it's created an inclusion, and it's had everybody using technology to help them in some way, in different ways. In BT, we have a strapline which is connecting for good, and modern communication technologies have enabled the UK. But the question I ask is how do we take the very, very, very best of what we've learned over the past few years and use it to blend all those technologies that are out there and use it to just make life easier and make things more effective? And ultimately, I think whoever you are and whatever background you're coming from and whatever focus is coming into this, we've all learned an awful lot of lessons throughout the pandemic. But how do we harness and really, really harness all the good that has come out of the pandemic and out of the lessons we've learned for the good of society? And how then do we use what we've learned and do we use what we now know to model what our future needs to look like? And that's really all I wanted to just to start with, Marc. So looking forward to the next 2 hours of discussion, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, Sean Penny from BT. For the audience, and it's a very welcome audience, our speakers are going to speak one after the other, and then we will go straight into a discussion where you, the audience, are going to be invited to question or to comment. So this first half is very much on the record, but the second half will be Chatham House rule. And as an audience member, please use the chat function if you want to make any points during the proceedings, but questions will be taken only in the second half. I'm going to try and cover as many as possible, either thematically or individually. So the second session will be very much over to you. I'm going to begin with a few opening remarks of my own, if I may. And Marc, thank you for the indulgence. As I think many people in the audience know, I have huge respect and affection for policing, but today I think we have to be a bit spiky with ourselves. The Mayor of London has just come out and demanded in short order the Met's plan to root out racism and misogyny and to win back trust and confidence from Londoners. And obviously 27% of the country is a significant policing footprint. For my own remarks, I'd like to thank Junior Smart, who chairs the research panel on disproportionality in taser use, and Sal Nassim, who's IOPC London Region Director, for sense checking what I'm about to say. So my aim today from the speakers, I'm putting them on notice, is to get practical ideas that can be taken away and tested and used. Let's start by challenging the theme of the discussion, community engagement. Really? Junior Smart's work, shaped by people who are independent of the police, have relevant expertise, lived experience, and are widely seen as authentic and credible. But they say that recent events have shown how important it is for the police and minority communities to forge better relationships. But to get there, you have to have meaningful and difficult conversations that explore the concerns that are raised time and time again. That time and time again is a problem. Communities are done to death with engaging. They're exhausted with the rhetoric of tokenistic engagement. Compare and contrast how quickly police mobilised around violence against women and girls, and how slowly, despite George Floyd's tragic death, May 2020 that was, to act on racial inclusivity. The Met wants to be the most trusted police service in the world. There's clearly more to be done. And think about this, coming from a black person. I have to conform to societal standards to exist in this country. I have to create a caricature palatable enough to comfort white people in white spaces, so I'll make it home to see my family. I can't afford to be anything other than what society demands me to be. If I ever become a hashtag, my family will know it was because I didn't comply. The IOPC's Houghton investigations found evidence of communications discrimination and offensive comments, that were made. Black and Asian police officers spoke of being ostracised. They found messages that evidenced repeated mocking of non-Christian religions, the Black Lives Matter movement, people with disabilities. They found racism and homophobia. The National Black Police Association this January acknowledges the progress that policing has made, and it has, but despite this desire to change things, they regrettably acknowledge that policing is still institutionally racist, which is not accepted by all, and the definition created during the Stephen Lawrence inquiry by Lord Macpherson is still applicable today. Institutional racism doesn't mean that all the officers or staff within policing are racist. It's about the systems and the processes developed in predominantly white environments over the years, often due to a lack of thought, not malice, and a lack of input because we have not got a diverse work culture or force. As the 34,000 strong employee-led policing on culture in 2021 showed. Why? Because it's inward looking, and because the workforce, particularly at senior levels, although there are more women, that's not total diversity. So there are definitely, and we've got some here, progressive leaders in policing, and this isn't just about managing, it's about leading at all levels, one of my themes at the College of Policing. Those leaders like Olivia, who provide psychological safety, enable speaking out, and promote shared values in which EDI is properly embedded. So, Olivia, turning to you, what do we need to do?
Thank you, Christine. And your comments weren't spiky, actually, and I genuinely look forward to the questions. And I think I'm very conscious of my 7 minutes, and I will keep to that. But a very personal reflection. First of all, I am fiercely proud of policing, and I'm fiercely proud of the women and men I serve alongside. But this period has caused me to reflect in a way that I have never to this level before, and I have reflected before. I've grown up in policing in the 90s, noughties and thereafter, and I absolutely acknowledge that this is the time for us as a service and me personally to reflect. So I'm here not with my Hampshire Constabulary hat on, but as the chair of local policing for the National Police Chiefs Council. And local policing perhaps is summarised best as the policing that all of us see and feel one way or another, and is also the gateway to everything else. So only if local policing, if we answer the phone right, we pick up social media right, we patrol right, we do our neighbour policing right, do all the other services that policing does across our mission get engaged with, and can it have a chance of doing it what it needs to do. So it is that gateway role as well. And to the point that Penny said in her remarks, you know, aside from the global pandemic, which we are hopefully moving through, I reflect that during COVID, policing enjoyed perhaps its highest level of public confidence we've had in the modern era. And now it feels to be in the flick of a switch at the lowest we've ever had. And the survey data that I've seen hasn't yet kind of followed on from that, and we shall see where that takes us. But that's how it feels, that real kind of high to low in a blink of an eye. And our legitimacy to serve and the daily fight we have to reduce crime and vulnerability is delivered by local policing and capabilities. And right now, as I sit here and we've got this 2 hours of conversation together, thousands of fine women and men are out there right now being highly professional, highly competent, highly skilled, dealing with people's darkest days, making them that bit better. And working with an enormous emotional intelligence and compassion. And I just want to kind of say that, because I think that often gets forgotten right now. And to answer the question of the day, in my view, transparency of what policing does and does not do is essential to gain and maintain public trust and confidence. And the big prize of the 20,000 new officers is an immense one. And it really is a once in a generation opportunity to develop a workforce that represents our communities, all of our communities, in a way that we all deeply want it to. And, you know, that is on track to do that, both in terms of gender, as you've said, Christine, but also in terms of minoritised communities and elsewhere. So, you know, all credit to the College of Policing for doing that and leading that for us. And I think there's also something, though, about that brings with such a wonderful influx of new people. We're having to help them become professionally competent very quickly. It is a lovely problem to have, but they are learning their trade. They do not arrive, you know, they are real people with real backgrounds. They put on this uniform, they have to then learn their trade, like we all do in whatever roles we are in, and being gracious and supporting them to do that matters. And one of the things that I know can be a struggle is where that blurring between personal and professional responsibilities, particularly from a Gen Z, can come from. And my role as a Chief Constable is to help them and guide them through that wisely. And of course, none of this, we can't afford to get any of this wrong, because we have a rapid increase of economic downturn and a rapidly evolving society. And another kind of thing that we know about Gen Z more broadly is, you know, a real challenge of regard for authority and institutions, and policing has both authority and is an institution, and we're seeing that play out in lots and lots of different institutions, aren't we? So policing has a role in building and consolidating societal resilience, would be perhaps the phrase I would use around that, and engaging with communities to answer the question of the day. And that's more than responding. It's more than just waiting for someone to ask for our help. It is going out there, being professionally curious, being there and meeting people where they are at. And being professionally competent matters. And that's one of the biggest things we can do, is be really good at policing. And sometimes that gets forgotten in the rhetoric. So actually, we've got a job to do here. We should be good at it. And by doing that well, that undoubtedly, I know, increases public confidence in us. Many people in our societies, and believe me, all of us in policing, really do feel the anger, the feeling of being let down by the many internal failings in police behaviours that we've had most recently, but also going back a couple of years, race and inclusion brought very much to the fore after George Floyd was murdered, and the Black Lives Matter that very reasonably flowed from that, to the continued violence and harassment of women and girls by men. And therefore, in my mind, there has never been a greater need for transparency and engagement to be at the forefront of what we're doing. And we know also, and those are just the recent aspects, we know there are things in our past within policing and also more broadly in UK society that cast a very, very long shadow. And we know that is right, and that time should be taken to understand those. So, you know, some of the great work that's going on, Dame Vera Baird as Victims Commissioner and others before her, you know, making sure that victims have a voice and are not just in the criminal justice element of that, although that is really important, but also be heard in terms of shaping service. And we know at the moment the criminal justice system has some really significant problems, and that none of those are going to be fixed overnight. So community engagement needs to help shape that. I know that it needs to help shape victim services, and policing is here to police for all, not just the majority or the loudest voice. And that can build in tension, good tension, healthy tension actually, but it does build in tension, because we're not just a majority service. And it is right at the heart, I think, of the British police model of that policing for all, not just for the majority. So we also know that 80% of police demand is not crime related. So we need to be we need to be trauma informed. We need skills that are about compassion and kindness and empathy. And the colleges, our professional values framework really helps us recruit and maintain and promote and select people who have those skills. So we're not only purely operationally competent, but we are also very much societally competent too. And the two are important. And the college has really shifted us to make sure we balance that well. And there are some big prizes working with partners like the integrated care system, like others, where we can really ensure that we are dealing with problems with society and that society needs us to help fix together. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to canter through, Christine, and really just make, I've got other things, perhaps they'll come out in the questions and the other comments that I was going to make. But it does feel a point in time. It feels an opportunity for policing to reflect and to seize, though, and to forever demonstrate and listen and amend and adapt and put away professional arrogance and make sure that we use this time for improvement. And I know that can feel trite, and I absolutely don't mean it to be trite. It is my absolute belief and intention to do the very best that I can and that we can. But going back to the thousands that are doing great work here and now, they need society support. They need good leadership, and I stand with them, as I said in my opening remarks. But I think really there's just three things in terms of public confidence and engagement. We need to be really good at policing. We need to look and feel like the communities we are privileged to serve, and we need to be transparent. And I'll leave it there, Christine.
Great, Olivia, that's covered an awful lot of ground, and there are plenty of ideas to test in there. And who better to advise us how to get to grips with racism than Professor Leslie Thomas QC. Leslie, over to you, please.
For more than 50 years, successive governments have tried to tackle the enduring nature of racism and the consequences of structural racial inequality through legislative interventions. However, in the 2020s, racism and racial inequality persist. Dr. Stephen Ash of the Stuart Hall Foundation in February 2021. Racism and discriminatory behaviours pervades all levels of our society, and policing is not immune from the same. As a police action lawyer, I've seen this many times over the course of my career. Macpherson said, quote, "Unwitting racism can arise because of a lack of understanding, ignorance, or mistaken beliefs. It can arise from well-intentioned but patronising words or action. It can arise from unfamiliarity with the behaviours or cultural traditions of people or families from minority ethnic communities. It can arise from some racist stereotyping of Black people as potential criminals or troublemakers. Often this arises out of uncritical self-understanding born out of an inflexible police ethos of the traditional way of doing things." You see, differential treatment of black and brown people occurs at all levels of the legal system. You know, I've seen unfavourable encounters with the police in decisions whether to charge or not, bail or not, the way a case is prosecuted, sentenced. And it's not just the police, it's the legal system as well, it's my professional colleagues. It also includes judges and the prison. Don't take my word for it. Just look at the 2017 Lammy review, which analysed the disproportionate treatment of BAME people in the criminal justice system. That makes really depressing reasons. Some of the statistics will come as no surprise to anyone who's been following the news, such as the fact that black people are 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police than white people. But it's not just the police who have a race problem. The judiciary has one as well. Lammy showed that BAME defendants were 240% more likely to be given a prison sentence for drug offences than white defendants for similar offences. And remember, black people make up only 3% of the general population, but make up 12% of prisoners. And a shockingly embarrassing and shameful statistic, 21% of children in custody. You know what? I feel at times that for every step we take forward, we take 2 steps back. And I find that we are where we started or behind. For all the progress that was made in the year of George Floyd's death, with so-called fresh and honest discussions in all areas of social life about how we can all do better, acknowledging and recognizing structural inequalities, and the way that many black people are at an unfair disadvantage, the pushback was going to be inevitable. The anti-woke movement we're now seeing. Surprisingly, it came from the government's own self-appointed race experts, the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, the CRED report published in March 2021. Fortunately, the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent categorically rejected and condemned the CRED analysis and findings. The UN experts, in their damning conclusion in April 21, found, quote, "It is stunning to read a report on race and ethnicity that repackages racist tropes and stereotypes into fact, twisting data and misapplying statistics and studies into conclusory findings, and an ad hominem attacks on people of African descent." The report attacked the credibility of those working to mitigate and lessen institutional racism, while denying the roles of institutions, including educators and educational institutions, in the data on the expectations and aspiration of boys and girls of African descent. You see, I don't want just to talk about the negatives. I want to give you some solutions in just a moment, but it is important to note that one of the big problems is a failure to acknowledge problems. Take the pandemic. This highlighted the problems with policing of black communities. Let me just use one example: fixed penalty notices for breach of COVID regulations. The Joint Committee on Human Rights published a report in April 21 on the government's use of FPNs, noting the figures by the National Police Chief Council. It found that despite Asian people making up 7.5% of the population, they represented 13% of those issued with fines. And whilst black people constituted 3.3% of the population, they represented 8% of those being fined. If only the police were just a little bit more conscientious of what our leaders, particularly those in Downing Street, were doing over the same period. So let me come on to solutions. I'm often asked, well, what are the solutions? Carrot or stick? Firstly, I believe we have to change mindsets. We do that, I believe, by getting the police to buy into why they feel they should feel the need for change. I'm heartened to hear what Olivia has said this afternoon. You see, by asking the question why, it's such a powerful question. If you understand the why, that's the key for potentially long-lasting and effective change. So why do we want to change? Why do we want to make our police more diverse? What is in it for the police? Because each individual police officer who walks around in white skin will silently be saying to themselves, what's in it for me? Now let's think about that. If you're in a group of an overrepresented group in society, you're in a position of power, privilege. And like it or not, there is an obviously a natural tendency to think that increased diversity, as in shifting other groups up, is a decrease in us. Let's face it, turkeys, if they had a vote, wouldn't vote for Christmas. But we need to get the police to understand that potential victims of crime and the public, or their colleagues, all come from many different backgrounds and cultures, and that a modern police service needs to perform its duty in a way that acknowledges these differences and the impact of discrimination of people it engages with. So, solutions.
Just give you a little, we're a bit over time, but I love what you're saying. Can we just wind that up and then I'll come back to you at the end, promise, all right?
Yeah, very quickly, I'm just going to run through. So I think, firstly, Black people, including Black police officers, need to educate and gain a better understanding of themselves. Secondly, I think it's really important to garner the support of white allies and those in leadership. Thirdly, I think it's important that white police officers and our white allies need to educate themselves. You can't look for Black people to educate you. I think we need to challenge the allies who are skeptics. We have to challenge the non-allies who are skeptics. I think we need to crunch the data and really look to see whether there's justifiable reasons for the differential treatment. Two more, and I'll finish. Police forces need to commission proper race experts to assist in drafting appropriate questionnaires, looking at their practices. And finally, each police force should devise for itself a list of achievable positive action steps to take, which they can measure, the benefits for the communities, setting clear targets, increasing numbers, mentoring, specialist recruitment. These are all positive steps that can be taken and are not illegal under the Equalities Act. Apologies for running over my time.
Not at all, Leslie. Bless you. That gives me loads and loads of positive outcome stuff that people can go back and do. Thank you very much. That is fantastic. I am going to turn to Donna and ask her about victims in all of this. Justice for victims, please, Donna.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I'd just like to say it's a pleasure to be speaking at my first Cityforum event. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to keep my comments as brief as we can so that we can recoup some time, hopefully, but I'm looking forward to the question session enormously. So just to quickly give you a bit of a background to me, to quantify some of the comments I'm going to make and the opinions I'm going to give you today around victims and the harm and trauma and impact of crime on victims living in Britain today. My professional background was in banking, and 15 years ago I left the private sector and got involved in politics, which led me into the public sector, and I was the executive leader of a city council in England, and I've also been a serving member of the judiciary for the last 16 years. In May last year I was elected as the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and I hold two national portfolios. Importantly, the first one, victims, which includes violence against women and girls, and secondly, serious organised crime. Now, for me, victims are predominantly focused on the 3 Ps. They're focused on punishment. They're focused on a prompt outcome when they enter either the judicial system or when they report a crime, and also often protection. They want to make sure they're not going to be harmed again in the future if it is a crime committed often by somebody that they know. So those 3 Ps: a fair and just outcome in terms of the punishment, the prompt and speedy judicial system to get them to where they need to be, and the protection in the future to prevent, and that really does lead us on to rehabilitation. Crimes in the UK, as we know, fall into 3 main categories: violent, sexual, or dishonest. And as a consequence of that, the impacts to victims are varying from low level to obviously the most serious of crimes, such as rape, serious sexual assault, or attempted murder, the most serious of offences which you can actually, in fact, survive. Now, whilst we have a very revered judicial system in Britain, as a police and crime commissioner, as somebody who is elected to represent over 2 million people in this country and one of the largest police forces, which Olivia is the very excellent Chief Constable presiding over, it doesn't lend itself to a restorative justice approach on the whole. And most victims are taken down a judicial process, which for the most serious of offences is of course the right way forward, because we have to make sure that we are taking rapists, murderers, child abusers off the streets of Britain for the protection of those victims and of others. But for many people, particularly those who are victims of medium and lower level crimes, I think there could be alternative options that I would love the government to consider. And I think that there is a significant part to play in restorative justice. Now, I mentioned trauma earlier and the varying levels of trauma that victims can go through. And in fact, once you start to recover from being a victim of crime, an offence, maybe an assault, knowing that you've then got that trial or a sentencing coming up perhaps 6 months, 12 months ahead can often delay for victims the recovery process, or in fact end up being a traumatic incident in its own right in the future. So for me, as somebody who is standing up for victims of crime and of course working very closely with the government, it's a point that I've made both to Rachel Maclean, the Safeguarding Minister, and Tom Pursglove, one of the Home Office ministers, in the last week. Now, a couple of days ago, on the 3rd of February, the upcoming Victims Bill consultation of the White Paper closed, and I fed into that along with other police and crime commissioners across the country. There are a number of things that the government are looking to introduce to improve the outcomes for victims, which I very much welcome. First of all, it's often been noted that victims of crime are not represented from an advocacy perspective throughout the criminal justice process. So let's take, for example, a victim of rape. They may well have a family liaison officer from the police force where they live supporting them, and very often that's the case in those very serious offences. But for many of them, they've never been through the criminal justice process. Most of them have never even been into a courtroom in Britain before. And so having somebody who can support them, that could be a sexual violence advocate, but someone who has a defined position in law, both for the Crown Prosecution Service and police forces to acknowledge and work with to support those victims, is key. So I do welcome the fact that the government are looking at an advocacy support for victims through the criminal justice process. Importantly, the Victims Bill, it looks like through the White Paper, is going to be recognising children as victims of crime. So, for example, children that live in a home with persistent and quite acute domestic abuse, domestic violence. Whilst the abuse may be very often, mother to father, or a male to a female living in the home, these children are hearing and often seeing, and actually recognising them as victims in their own right can help us to address those adverse childhood experiences to make sure that they have the best chance possible of growing up to have successful outcomes. And one of the third thing for me on the Victims Bill, one of the most significant things is the introduction of the Section 28 powers. So this is the ability for victims to have a pre-recorded cross-examination. Now, the government have given a clear indication that they want this to happen in the RASO, the rape and serious sexual assault cases. And I really do welcome that. And in particular, a focus on a perpetrator-led investigation and not a victim-led investigation, i.e. the victim's sexual history and background when you do have rape and serious sexual assault offences. Couple of final points from me, Christine, before I wind up. we did have a really landmark piece of legislation last year in the new domestic abuse bill in July 2021. You know, the highest volume crime for any police force in this country will be reports of domestic abuse and domestic violence. In fact, courts across England and Wales have dedicated domestic abuse courts only, and that is also being considered for rape and serious sexual assault. But at the moment, there are dedicated courts for that purpose because of the sheer volume. And as a Police and Crime Commissioner, every time I have been into custody in my police force area, over half of the people in custody, whether it's 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, have been people who have been arrested on suspicion of some kind of domestic violence or domestic abuse. The new police crime sentencing courts bill, whilst it's a monster of a piece of legislation, currently desperately trying to work its way through Parliament with many alterations coming forward. But actually there is a key piece of change to legislation in there, and that is that the government are intending to, for victims of crime, make sure that the most violent and most serious sexual predators in the country are locked up for their entire sentence. So they will not be given the opportunity to apply for parole 50% of the way through their sentence and therefore come out on licence. They will serve their whole sentence. But on the flip side of that, of course, we don't have enough prison spaces to keep people locked up for all this time. So there will be a different approach adopted towards, let's say, for example, persistent shoplifters who are not necessarily physically injuring anybody on a daily basis or sexually abusing somebody or perhaps abusing a child. But what they are doing is committing crime in the UK, and there has to be a better approach to dealing with some of those people. So I do welcome a change. It's been a very long time coming, but I think there has to be a better approach. Also, burglars, people who commit domestic burglaries, will be tagged when they come out of prison for a year, so that police forces are able to monitor their whereabouts. Finally, scorecards. Criminal justice scorecards are being introduced.
Just briefly, please, if we can, Donna, because we're a bit over here. Yeah.
No problem. Criminal justice scorecards are being introduced to speed up the court process. Because of COVID, there have been significant backlogs, and one of my specific roles as chair of the Hampshire Criminal Justice Board, but also as somebody representing victims nationally, is to make sure that we do get the court backlogs cleared as quickly as possible, because we need to get dangerous people off the streets of Britain. And my final comment, for those that aren't aware, is that commissioners, Police and Crime Commissioners such as myself, have the power and a statutory responsibility to commission services to support victims of crime and also to work with those most at risk of committing crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, delivered with great passion. And I would like to conclude this part of the proceedings by asking John Kabuye, who founded the Ubuntu Centre in Middlesbrough, which is, of course, to me, south of the river, I have to say, John, as I was born north of Newcastle. However, you founded that centre, you've got deep community roots. Could you tell us really about what this engagement with so-called minorities is, how to get it right, how does it work, what should we be doing? John.
Okay, sorry, I was on. Thank you very much, Cityforum, and it's really a privilege to debate or to present with the brains. Really, I'm impressed. Thank you. It's a really good privilege. Yes, founder of Ubuntu Multicultural Center in Middlesbrough. One of the main objectives of us founding Ubuntu, it was to offer space where the local BEM communities and local authority agents like police, where they can learn about different cultures to create a stronger relationship with the ethnic minority communities. So we wanted to create that link permanent. From experience, because I've lived here for 20 years now, we identify that the ethnic minority communities, especially Black people, in Middlesbrough often lacked the confidence and trust to seek and access help with the police, amongst others. So in Uganda, where I come from, the police is our enemy number one. But when I came here, I was expecting something very different, transparent, accountable, and inclusive. Because enemy in Uganda, police is enemy number one, when we come here, many people think police is the same as in Uganda or same as in other African countries. So they tend to be scared. They tend to show signs of for example, running away, but which is on many occasions it is interpreted as you are running away from crime, and it causes problem. So we organized various meetings, seminars. We had face-to-face discussions between us and the police. And there's a team in the police which is called the engagement team. We also had Zoom calls with the EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion personnel. So on those occasions, the community told the officers present their fears and why there is that mistrust. So the community also suggested ideas to the police, ideas that would improve their confidence and trust in the police. One thing that was requested was to sit in one of the cultural training awareness sessions. I think they do something like CPDs, or to avail us with the cultural awareness programs or training, because we wanted to see how is it taught, what information is there, where do they get it from. We also asked for closer collaboration, meeting more influential people in the police, because we are only meeting engagement team, but we wanted people who make change, who make decisions. And we also asked to improve on the representation of the force. For example, looking at people or meeting people who look like you can improve that confidence. You walk around Middlesbrough, there's no black police person. Of course, we've got a few Asians, but yeah, there's that lack of confidence. So we have always been asked to report hate crime. The bang on is asking us to report whatever you see, but the community is kind of frustrated with the lack of feedback and often no explanation on the outcomes, mainly regarding closure of cases that are reported. So community is losing interest. I mean, in a way, they're telling us, you asked us to report, but nothing is being done. So we wonder why, what's happening. And during Black Lives Matter, we've been told that the engagement team in our force, I don't know whether it was nationwide, that it was the team was not allowed to talk about it with the community. However much we asked questions because we wanted answers, but we were told to keep mute. To me, I think this was a missed opportunity to talk about issues affecting people, even probably getting solutions. It would have been very good to have a good conversation and discussion. So we have only experienced, in my view, superficial pleasantry without commitment to change. What I mean by that, for example, I was asked one day, do you want to take some food or children or your team somewhere? I can offer you transport. And I'm saying, this is what I need. I need something proper. So I need change. I don't need I just don't need just superficial pleasantries, not at all. And with no opportunity to talk to the change makers at a strategic level. So they've given us those superficial things with no opportunity at all to talk about change that we really need. There has been lack of follow-up from those who make decisions. All what we get are the usual corporate answer to the sensitive questions we need answered. You ask a question, you ask for commitment, and there are those standard template of answers that you get, and that you have nowhere to go. Yes, just okay, all right, that kind of thing. So there's a feeling that however much we try to seek for help, look for answers, and offer suggestions, the key contacts seem not to want to escalate issues further. And the question is why? Is there something racial? Of course, there is racism, but is there something structural that say don't do that? So there is lack of commitment for change. There is lack of that commitment at a managerial level. We think all all the roles that receive and get engaged in the community are just the engagement team reporting to probably a manager somewhere, but who does not have clue about community they serve. But we see them, engagement team, doing their best. They really talk to us. But when we ask them, have you told your manager this? What have they said? The answer we get, yeah, we've told them, but we're still waiting. We're still waiting. How long are we going to wait? So there's lack of commitment for change. There's lack of that commitment at a managerial level, and all the roles receive and get engaged in the community are just engagement team. So a lot of useful information and suggestions are lost at a managerial, they're lost at engagement level. They don't reach the managerial level, which is sad. So there is also a lack of representation at a strategic decision-making level. The reason why I wanted to join politics was to make sure that I sit at the decision-making table. So we think there is that lack. So the operational level results in coming with programs that do not adequately meet our needs. So there is need, I hope so, at the solution, there's need for comprehensive and participatory approaches that establish collaborative partnerships with community. I think that's lacking. We feel that we should have that collaborative partnership way of working. All of us are the same. No one is big, higher or bigger than the other. So, and issues of distrust, language, and cultural differences can be prevented by not only having more meetings with the communities or having seminars or recruitment drives, but we think with a simple thing, in my opinion, probably not very simple, which I call acceptance. I've worked in many places here, and they give us jobs sometimes, but we see there's a lack of acceptance that, John, you are working with us, you're there. You've been given a job as a token, but there's a lack of acceptance. There's a way they try to do to treat you, and eventually you give up. So I can be given a position, but if you don't accept me and you sideline me, I'll end up leaving that position, hence achieving nothing at all. So it is very important to ensure there are more meaningful opportunities for BAME communities to engage with the police on their strategies, plans, and service delivery. It is also crucial that BAME communities can be or can see the impact of their engagement. Thank you very much.